SIBO is a condition where there's an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, and you may be thinking, well, all the cool kids have SIBO now, but the reality is that we should not have a lot of bacteria in the small intestine or the stomach. All of our good bacteria should be in the large intestine. So if you're dealing with SIBO, it can be really helpful to understand how that came about so you can work to make sure that doesn't happen again. So in this video, I'm going to cover the 4 most common causes of SIBO, sort of. By the end of this video, you might be saying, well, is there really just one cause of SIBO? Let's get at it.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
Now, when we start to talk about underlying causes for SIBO, the reality is that you may never really get to know what caused your SIBO, because as we go through some of these explanations in this video, you're going to see that you might be saying, well, was it this issue that created this malfunction, or was it this malfunction that created this issue? And that'll make a little bit more sense as we jump into our first underlying cause for SIBO, which is a lack of stomach acid. Now, this issue is extremely common, and there's also a wide variety of things that could cause a person not to be creating enough stomach acid. Things like using antacids or PPIs, or drinking alkaline water, or using baking soda. These are all very popular things that millions of people do around the world, and these can all turn off your stomach acid. So to understand why this is problematic, we need to understand how digestion is supposed to work. So when we eat food and it goes into the stomach, our stomach makes hydrochloric acid, or HCl as we call it. And this stomach acid is made to break that food down. So once that food is properly acidified and starts to break down, it moves out of the stomach into the small intestine, or the duodenum, and then the gallbladder drops bile down onto that acidic product. Now, the bile is alkaline, so we get this acidic product meeting an alkaline product, and that creates this sizzle. This sizzle is what busts all the food apart and helps us access all the nutrients that are in that food. So both of those processes are important to be able to break down our food correctly. But the stomach acid is more than just what helps us break down our food. It's the barrier to the whole body. It's basically like our knight in very disgusting armor. Because any bad guy, any varmint, any bacterial, any microbe that comes in on the food that we're eating, and it's coming in on the food. Like, we just don't have a way to really get around that. And when these little varmints come in, they die in an acid bath in the stomach. That's part of what the stomach acid is there for. It kills all bad guys that come in. So when a person is not making enough stomach acid, the bad guys come in, they're like, hey, check it out. This is nice. Let's set up camp. Let's have a keg party. Let's raise our kids. They start to replicate. They start to take over in the stomach. And a big problem is that a waste product from a lot of these microbes can be very alkaline, and it can further alkalize the stomach, reducing your ability to break down your food even more. So you can see that this can be a really big problem. Now, when we're looking at this issue as far as SIBO goes, well, if bacteria can survive in the stomach, they're going to continue moving down into the small intestine and set up camp there. So all of a sudden we have all of this bacteria in the stomach or the small intestine, and they're replicating there, they're setting up camp, they're having a great time. All of the waste product from these microbes is becoming more alkaline and alkalizing this area that should not be alkaline. So it's going to create a lot of problems. A big issue with this is if you have all these microbes in the small intestine, they're competing for all your micronutrients. And they're going to access these micronutrients before you do, which leaves you depleted in a lot of nutrients. So a person can get stuck in this broken digestion state for years or decades, because the reality is that we need HCl to break our food down so that we can pull all the nutrients out of that food. But we need minerals from our food to be able to make hydrochloric acid. So the body can get stuck in, well, which one got broken first? Was it broken because we couldn't break down the food and access the minerals? Or Do we just not have enough minerals available to access that food? Who knows? What we know is that the system is broken and it needs to be corrected in order for us to be able to access nutrients in the food that we're eating. So a lot of times you might not get to know, did I have food poisoning where some kind of really aggressive microbe came in and then started to alkalize the stomach and then reduced my ability to access nutrients? Or was it because my stomach acid was already low? Because maybe I was missing nutrients, or maybe my life was stressed out and a lot of my nutrients were going towards dealing with that issue and not enough was going towards digestion. There's a wide variety of issues that could come about that can create this low stomach acid issue, but once that front door is open, that's a problem because the bad guys are coming in and your barrier is gone and they can move down to the small intestine and create this SIBO issue. So I view this inability to acidify our food and that front door barrier being gone that allows these microbes to come in and go places where they shouldn't be, I view that as the number one most common underlying cause for SIBO. Now when we look at number two, we're looking at poor bile flow. So remember, when the acidic product leaves the stomach, the bile comes down from the gallbladder and neutralizes those acids and it creates that sizzle. So a lot of people say that bile seems to have some antimicrobial properties and can help neutralize or get rid of any of those microbes that may be coming in. And there are microbes that thrive more in an acidic product. So if there's any microbes that come in and get through the stomach acid, this bile is here to help wipe them out as well. And is bile really antimicrobial? I don't really know. I've never squirted bile into a petri dish of microbes to see if they scream in horror, but I hear that this seems to be the case. But my thought is, I wonder, is it more about that sizzle, that the two pHs of vast differences meeting together and creating that sizzle, is that more about what's wiping out the bad guys that might get through the stomach? And that may be the case, but in any case, it's very common for bile to become too thick and sticky to flow correctly. And we see this with people all the time. And so if your bile isn't flowing correctly, this may be another door that you have wide open, allowing bad guys to come in. So in the description below this video, we'll put a link to our video for 5 steps you can take to improve bile flow to make sure your bile is moving well enough to knock out these varmints coming in the door. In the very least, we know we need good bile flow to create that sizzle to pull all the minerals out of our food so that the body has the minerals it needs to be able to make HCl. So that can be an important step just to make sure that the stomach can acidify properly. Now when we look at the third common cause of SIBO, a lot of people say that this will be poor peristalsis. This just means that once that food bolus gets into the small intestine, it's not moving like it should. And a lot of people like to blame these, poor neuron signals that are telling the small intestinal lining to move this stuff along. But the reality is that this bolus moves at a pace according to its acidity level. When the stool or this food bolus is too acidic, it will move through the system very quickly because otherwise it would digest the lining of the intestinal tract. The body doesn't want that. So it brings as much water there as it can to cool it down, and it moves it through the system quickly, get this out of here before it burns a hole in us. Now if we're not making enough stomach acid, or maybe the stool or the food bolus is too alkaline because of all this bacterial alkaline waste that's going on, then it'll move through the system at a slower pace. So a lot of people feel like, well, this peristalsis isn't working, so then food starts to rot and ferment, and this fermentation can make the environment more suitable for bacteria to thrive and allow them to thrive in the small intestine. So this can kind of lead back to that lack of stomach acid. If the lack of stomach acid is there, then it's not going to be acidic enough to move through at a proper pace, and it is going to rot and ferment, and that's going to create that poor peristalsis issue. So is that really the cause of the SIBO, or is it just another issue going on while the SIBO is there? It's hard to really say. People also talk about this migrating motor complex as basically that system kind of moving things through even after the food is gone and kind of cleaning up that intestinal tract and getting everything out. And they're like, your migrating motor complex isn't working, so all this bacteria is thriving here in the small intestine. But again, is this more about everything in the system just moving slowly because it's leaning too far on the alkaline side due to a lack of stomach acid to help it move through the system correctly? The fourth common underlying cause for SIBO that we hear about is ileocecal valve functions. Now, there's a valve at the end of the small intestine that kind of helps food move from the small intestine into the large intestine, where we should have beneficial bacteria. So there should be bacteria in that large intestine, but not in the small intestine. So if that valve is not closing properly, then bacteria from the large intestine can seep back up into the small intestine, and then up into the small intestine goes the bacteria, and they get that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So this is a big problem if that's happening with you, and we hear a lot about this, and it doesn't seem to happen as common as these other issues, but it can be a problem. Still, we view this as when things aren't moving along at a pace that they should, there's more room for error, there's more room for malfunction, and there's more room for things to move the wrong direction. So a lot of these valves are actually triggered by chemical reactions that are going on in that intestinal pathway. There's another valve at the bottom of your esophagus. It's called a lower esophageal sphincter, and that sphincter is triggered by stomach acid. There has to be enough stomach acid to trigger that valve to close, or a person is going to have a reflux issue. So a lot of these sphincters through this system are triggered by these chemical reactions. So when there's not enough acid, there's not enough bile, not everything happens the way that it should be, and that can cause problems to some of these other valves further down the line. So again, we need to make sure that everything's happening from the top down to the bottom. And if there isn't enough stomach acid there, then that's the first breakdown where everything starts to go wrong. So when you look at these 4-ish causes for SIBO, you can see that they can all lead back to a lack of stomach acid. So if you're dealing with SIBO, the first thing you want to know is, do I have a lack of stomach acid? Do I need to correct that problem? So we have a totally free digestion course online, and we'll put the link to that course down in the description below the video. And that course will walk you through figuring out, are there aspects of digestion that are not working for me? And if they are, here's the simple steps you can take to correct those problems. Also keep in mind that once you get your SIBO corrected, you don't want it to come back. So check the description below for a link to our video on how to avoid SIBO relapse. I can't wait to hear about your results.